What if the GPS on your phone isn't tracking your car, but mapping out the places where you are going to die? What if the emergency lights on the side of the highway aren't there to warn drivers, but to mark the spots where bodies haven't been found yet? What if the voice coming from your dashboard navigation system isn't an AI, but someone screaming for help from inside the trunk? The heavy tires of the pickup truck splashed through deep, muddy puddles as Liam Miller drove deeper into the pitch-black wilderness of northern Maine. It was 11:45 p.m. At 24, Liam was a freelance land surveyor, tasked with mapping out a remote, forgotten stretch of woods that a logging company had recently purchased. The rain was coming down in sheets, drumming a relentless, deafening rhythm against the metal roof of his cabin. The headlights of his truck barely cut through the thick, swirling mountain fog, illuminating only a few feet of the broken asphalt ahead. The air inside the truck felt heavy and damp, smelling faintly of old iron and wet leaves. He had been driving on Route 12 for over 2 hours without seeing a single building, a single gas station, or another pair of headlights. Everything felt normal, if isolated, when he first turned off the main interstate. But as the clock on his dashboard clicked to midnight, the world outside began to warp. First, his phone lost all cellular signal, the bars dropping instantly to a flat, dead void. Then the truck's digital navigation screen began to glitch violently. The blue line indicating the road started to twist into impossible shapes, spiraling in tight geometric circles before the entire screen turned a solid, bruised purple. The built-in GPS began to call out directions, but the voice was no longer the smooth, computerized female tone he was used to. It was a raspy, multi-layered whisper that sounded like several people speaking at the exact same time. In 300 feet, pull over. In 300 feet, turn off the engine. They are waiting. Liam's heart slammed against his ribs. He went to turn off the radio, but the dial was completely unresponsive. The volume began to rise on its own, blasting a wall of static mixed with the faint, unmistakable sound of frantic fingernails scratching against the inside of his dashboard. Panic spiking in his chest, Liam slammed his foot on the brakes. The truck skidded on the slick asphalt, spinning 90 degrees before coming to a hard stop crosswise on the road. His headlights flashed across the tree line, illuminating an old rusted iron gate buried deep in the overgrown brush. He pulled a heavy tactical flashlight from his glove box, popped the door open, and stepped out into the freezing, torrential rain. The cold air hit him like a physical blow, turning his frantic breath into thick white plumes. He approached the gate, shielding his eyes from the downpour. Hanging from the rusted iron chains was a weathered metal sign that read, Blackwood Timber Colony, established 1914. Liam felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. He knew this name. Blackwood was a ghost story among surveyors. In the winter of 1946, the entire logging camp, 84 men had vanished into the forest during a severe blizzard. When the search parties arrived, they found fires still burning and food on the tables, but every single human being was gone. They were never found. A sudden loud clunk echoed from the bed of his truck. Liam spun around, swinging the flashlight beam through the darkness. The rain was falling so hard it looked like silver needles in the light. Nothing was there, but when he turned back toward his phone inside the cab, the screen had lit up again. It wasn't showing a map anymore. It was displaying a live text feed, a string of coordinates typing themselves out onto the screen, followed by a sentence, 84 souls logged, 1 remaining. A heavy, wet squelching sound came from the dense mud behind the rusted gate. Liam raised his flashlight, his hands shaking so violently the beam danced wildly across the dark pines. The iron gate began to groan as something pushed against it from the dark interior of the woods. Out of the fog stepped a figure. It wore a heavy, oil-stained canvas coat and thick leather logging boots, but it didn't move like a man. It moved with a sickening, jerky rhythm, its legs snapping forward at bizarre angles, its shoulders hitching up and down as if its bones were broken. and being forcibly dragged through its flesh by invisible heavy wires. It looked like a corpse being animated by a cruel, clumsy puppeteer. "We need to update the boundary lines, Liam," a voice echoed through the pouring rain. It didn't come from the figure's mouth. It was a terrifying, discordant chorus of dozens of different voices, gruff older men, younger boys, all speaking in a flat, breathless unison that seemed to vibrate directly inside Liam's ears. Julian stumbled backward against the hood of his truck, his breath catching in his throat. "Who are you? What do you want?" The figure stopped right at the gate. Slowly, with a series of loud, wet cracking sounds, its head tilted all the way back until its chin was pointing directly at the sky, snapping its neck at a horrific 90-degree angle. As the flashlight beam hit its face, Liam let out a choked scream. The entity had no facial features. There were no eyes, no nose, no mouth, just a smooth, pale expanse of skin stretched tightly over a human skull. But beneath the translucent flesh, something alive was writhing. Dozens of thick, worm-like shapes were tunneling under the skin, aggressively pushing outward, trying to force the blank canvas of the face into a human shape. The blank skin began to violently ripple and bubble. Within seconds, the shifting flesh settled into a perfect, terrifying copy of Liam's own face. It was a mirror image, but the eyes were hollow, swimming with a wet, pulsing black liquid, and the mouth split open far too wide, revealing rows of jagged, needle-like teeth. The entity smiled and spoke, using Liam's own precise voice, but infected with a deep, predatory malice. "Don't run, Liam. We already mapped out where you belong. You're just a line on our grid." Absolute psychological horror paralyzed his mind. This wasn't a simple ghost. It was an ancient, supernatural force that lived within the geography of the mountain, a shape-shifting predator that had digested the entire colony of Blackwood and was now using their collective forms and voices to hunt him. It was a living anomaly that rewrote reality, copying the faces of the lost to trap the living. Suddenly, the forest around him came alive with whispering. Thousands of voices began to bleed from the trees and the mud beneath his boots. "Draw the line. Close the map. Stay in the dirt." The deep shadows cast by the pine trees began to detach themselves from the bark, sliding across the wet grass like spilled black ink, all slithering rapidly toward his boots. As they entered the beam of his flashlight, the shadows began to rise, taking on the half-formed, grotesque silhouettes of men holding rusted axes, their elongated arms stretching out to grab him. Time completely shattered. The digital clock on Liam's truck dashboard began to spin backward at a frantic speed, erasing the decades. Adrenaline finally broke through his paralysis. Liam lunged back into the driver's seat of his truck, slamming the heavy metal door shut and locking it just as a massive pale hand with elongated fingers shattered the passenger side window. Shards of glass exploded into the cab as a chorus of 84 dead voices screamed his name through the opening. Liam slammed the truck into reverse, floored the gas pedal, and the vehicle roared to life, the tires spinning wildly in the deep mud before catching the asphalt. He threw the truck into drive, speeding backward down Route 12 at 90 miles an hour, smashing through branches and ignoring the screaming alerts on his dashboard. In his rearview mirror, he could see the entity wearing his own face dropping onto all fours, its limbs bending backward with sickening cracks as it pursued the truck with a rapid insect-like skittering speed. He drove through the blinding fog and torrential rain for what felt like eternity, pushed by pure, frantic survival instinct, until the dark walls of the Maine wilderness finally broke apart, revealing the familiar glowing streetlights of the city. The storm had passed, and a weak gray morning light was breaking over the horizon when Liam finally pulled his battered, glass-shattered truck into the driveway of his suburban home. He was hyperventilating, his hands cut and bleeding from the broken glass, his body shaking from deep exhaustion. He bolted out of the car, ran into his house, and locked the front door with every deadbolt, chain, and security latch he owned. He collapsed against the wall, sliding down to the floor, gasping for air. He forced his mind to rationalize the nightmare. It was a hallucination. It had to be. He had been working 80 hours a week, breathing in old mold in the woods. The mind plays tricks in the dark. He was back in his living room now. The forest was miles away. He was safe. An hour passed in absolute suffocating silence. The warmth of the house slowly calmed his frayed nerves. Then a soft, deliberate metallic scrape echoed from the bottom of the front door, right behind his head. Liam froze, every muscle in his body locking into place. He turned his head slowly, watching in absolute horror as the small brass mail slot on the door slowly pushed open from the outside. There were no footsteps on his porch, no cars on the street. A small, heavy object slid through the narrow slot, landing on the hardwood floor with a loud, distinct metallic thud. A pristine piece of folded white parchment followed it, sliding smoothly across the carpet. His heart stopping in his chest, Liam forced his trembling legs to move, crawling on his hands and knees toward the object. Lying on the floor was a rusted vintage brass compass, the exact model used by surveyors in 1946, engraved with the initials of the Blackwood colony. With a hand that shook so violently he could barely hold it, Liam picked up the folded piece of parchment and opened it. Written across the paper in a precise, elegant, and chillingly familiar handwriting, his own handwriting, was a single line of text. The map is drawn. Your house is now inside the forest. Look out your window, Liam.